Sydney Harbor is shut in behind a precipice that extends some miles like a wall and exhibits no break to the ignorant stranger. It has a break in the middle, but it makes so little show that even Captain Cook sailed by it without seeing it. Nearby that break is a false break which resembles it, and which used to make trouble for the mariner at night in the early days before the place was lighted. It caused the memorable disaster to the Duncan Dunbar, one of the most pathetic tragedies in the history of that pitiless ruffian, the sea. The ship was a sailing vessel, a fine and favorite passenger packet, commanded by a popular captain of high reputation. She was due from England, and Sydney was waiting and counting the hours and making ready to give her a heart-stirring welcome. For she was bringing back a great company of mothers and daughters, the long-missed light and bloom of life of Sydney homes, daughters that had been years absent at school, and mothers that had been with them all that time watching over them. Of all the world, only India and Australasia have by custom freighted ships and fleets with their hearts, and know the tremendous meaning of that phrase. Only they know what the waiting is like when this freightage is entrusted to the fickle winds, not steam, and what the joy is like when the ship that is returning this treasure comes safe to port and the long dread is over. On board the Duncan Dunbar, flying toward Sydney Heads in the waning afternoon, the happy homecomers made busy preparation, for it was not doubted that they would be in the arms of their friends before the day was done. They put away their seagoing clothes and put on clothes meeter for the meeting, their richest and their loveliest, these, poor brides of the grave. But the wind lost force, or there was a miscalculation, and before the heads were sighted the darkness came on. It was said that ordinarily the captain would have made a safe offing and waited for the morning, but this was no ordinary occasion. All about him were appealing faces, faces pathetic with disappointment, so his sympathy moved him to try the dangerous passage in the dark. He had entered the head 17 times and believed he knew the ground, so he steered straight for the false opening, mistaking it for the true one. He did not find out that he was wrong until it was too late. There was no saving the ship. The great seas swept her in and crushed her to splinters and rubbish upon the rock tushes at the base of the precipice. Not one of all that fair and gracious company was ever seen again alive. The tale is told to every stranger that passes the spot, and it will continue to be told to all that come, for generations. But it will never grow old, custom cannot stale it, the heartbreak that is in it can never perish out of it. There were 200 persons in the ship, and but one survived the disaster. He was a sailor. A huge sea flung him up the face of the precipice and stretched him on a narrow shelf of rock midway between the top and the bottom, and there he lay all night. At any other time he would have lain there for the rest of his life, without chance of discovery. But the next morning, the ghastly news swept through Sydney that the Duncan Dunbar had gone down in sight of home, and straightway the walls of the heads were black with mourners, and one of these, stretching himself out over the precipice to spy out what might be seen below, discovered this miraculously preserved relic of the wreck. Ropes were brought, and the nearly impossible feat of rescuing the man was accomplished. He was a person with a practical turn of mind, and he hired a hall in Sydney and exhibited himself at sixpence a head till he exhausted the output of the goldfields for that year. We entered and cast anchor, and in the morning went owing and awing in admiration up through the crooks and turns of the spacious and beautiful harbor, a harbor which is the darling of Sydney and the wonder of the world. It is not surprising that the people are proud of it, nor that they put their enthusiasm into eloquent words. A returning citizen asked me what I thought of it, and I testified with a cordiality which I judged would be up to the market rate. I said it was beautiful, superbly beautiful. Then by a natural impulse I gave God the praise. The citizen did not seem altogether satisfied. He said, "It is beautiful, of course it's beautiful. The harbor, but that isn't all of it, it's only half of it. Sydney's the other half, and it takes both of them together to ring the supremacy bell. God made the harbor, and that's all right, but Satan made Sydney." Of course I made an apology, and asked him to convey it to his friend. He was right about Sydney being half of it. It would be beautiful without Sydney, but not above half as beautiful as it is now, with Sydney added. It is shaped somewhat like an oak leaf, a roomy sheet of lovely blue water, with narrow offshoots of water running up into the country on both sides between long fingers of land, high wooden ridges with sides sloped like graves. Handsome villas are perched here and there on these ridges, snuggling amongst the foliage, and one catches alluring glimpses of them as the ship swims by toward the city. The city clothes a cluster of hills, and a ruffle of neighboring ridges with its undulating masses of masonry, and out of these masses spring towers and spires and other architectural dignities and grandeurs that break the flowing lines and give picturesqueness to the general effect. The narrow inlets which I have mentioned go wandering out into the land everywhere and hiding themselves in it, and pleasure launches are always exploring them with picnic parties on board. It is said by trustworthy people that if you explore them, all you will find that you have cover miles of water passage. But there are liars everywhere this year, and they will double that when their works are in good going order. October was close at hand, spring was come. It was really spring, everybody said so, but you could have sold it for summer in Canada, and nobody would have suspected. It was the very weather that makes our home summers the perfection of climatic luxury. I mean, when you are out in the wood or by the sea. But these people said it was cool. Now, a person ought to see Sydney in the summertime if he wanted to know what warm weather is, and he ought to go north 10 or 1500 miles if he wanted to know what hot weather is. They said that away up there toward the equator the hens laid fried eggs. Sydney is the place to go to get information about other people's climates. It seems to me that the occupation of unbiased traveler seeking information is the pleasantest and most irresponsible trade there is. The traveler can always find out anything he wants to, merely by asking. He can get at all the facts and more. Everybody helps him, nobody hinders him. Anybody who has an old fact in stock that is no longer negotiable in the domestic market will let him have it at his own price. An accumulation of such goods is easily and quickly made. They cost almost nothing, and they bring par in the foreign market. Travelers who come to America always freight up with the same old nursery tales that their predecessors selected, and they carry them back and always work them off without any trouble in the home market. If the climates of the world were determined by parallels of latitude, then we could know a place's climate by its position on the map. And so we should know that the climate of Sydney was the counterpart of the climate of Columbia, SC, and of Little Rock, Arkansas, since Sydney is about the same distance south of the equator that those other towns are north of it, 34 degrees. But no, climate disregards the parallels of latitude. In Arkansas they have a winter, in Sydney they have the name of it but not the thing itself. I have seen the ice in the Mississippi floating past the mouth of the Arkansas River, and at Memphis, but a little way above, the Mississippi has been frozen over from bank to bank. But they have never had a cold spell in Sydney which brought the mercury down to freezing point. Once in a midwinter day there, in the month of July, the mercury went down to 36 deg, and that remains the memorable, cold day in the history of the town. No doubt Little Rock has seen it below zero. Once, in Sydney, in midsummer, about New Year's Day, the mercury went up to 106 deg. In the shade, and that is Sydney's memorable hot day. That would about tally with Little Rock's hottest day also, I imagine. My Sydney figures are taken from a government report and are trustworthy. In the matter of summer weather, Arkansas has no advantage over Sydney, perhaps, but when it comes to winter weather, that is another affair. You could cut up an Arkansas winter into 100 Sydney winters and have enough left for Arkansas and the poor. The whole narrow, hilly belt of the Pacific side of New South Wales has the climate of its capital, a mean winter temperature of 54 deg, and a mean summer one of 71 deg. It is a climate which cannot be improved upon for healthfulness. But the experts say that 90 deg in New South Wales is harder to bear than 112 deg. In the neighboring colony of Victoria, because the atmosphere of the former is humid and of the latter dry. The mean temperature of the southernmost point of New South Wales is the same as that of Nice, 60 deg. Yet Nice is further from the equator by 460 miles than is the former. But nature is always stingy of perfect climates, stingier in the case of Australia than usual. Apparently this vast continent has a really good climate nowhere but around the edges. If we look at a map of the world, we are surprised to see how big Australia is. It is about 2/3 as large as the United States was before we added Alaska. But whereas one finds a sufficiently good climate and fertile land almost everywhere in the United States, it seems settled that inside of the Australian border belt, one finds many deserts, and in spots a climate which nothing can stand except a few of the hardier kinds of rocks. In effect, Australia is as yet unoccupied. If you take a map of the United States and leave the Atlantic seaboard states in their places, also the fringe of southern states from Florida west to the mouth of the Mississippi. Also a narrow, inhabited streak up the Mississippi halfway to its headwaters. Also a narrow, inhabited border along the Pacific coast. Then take a brushful of paint and obliterate the whole remaining mighty stretch of country that lies between the Atlantic states and the Pacific coast strip. Your map will look like the latest map of Australia. This stupendous blank is hot, not to say torrid. A part of it is fertile, the rest is desert. It is not liberally watered, it has no towns. One has only to cross the mountains of New South Wales and descend into the westward-lying regions to find that he has left the choice climate behind him and found a new one of a quite different character. In fact, he would not know by the thermometer that he was not in the blistering plains of India. Captain Sturt, the great explorer, gives us a sample of the heat. The wind, which had been blowing all the morning from the NE, increased to a heavy gale, and I shall never forget its withering effect. I sought shelter behind a large gum tree, but the blasts of heat were so terrific that I wondered the very grass did not take fire. This really was nothing ideal. Everything both animate and inanimate gave way before it. The horses stood with their backs to the wind and their noses to the ground, without the muscular strength to raise their heads. The birds were mute, and the leaves of the trees under which we were sitting fell like a snow shower around us. At noon, I took a thermometer graded to 127 deg out of my box and observed that the mercury was up to 125. Thinking that it had been unduly influenced, I put it in the fork of a tree close to me, sheltered alike from the wind and the sun. I went to examine it about an hour afterwards, when I found the mercury had risen to the top of the instrument and had burst the bulb, a circumstance that I believe no traveler has ever before had to record. I cannot find language to convey to the reader's mind an idea of the intense and oppressive nature of the heat that prevailed. That hot wind sweeps over Sydney sometimes and brings with it what is called a dust storm. It is said that most Australian towns are acquainted with the dust storm. I think I know what it is like, for the following description by Mr. Gape tallies very well with the alkali dust storm of Nevada, if you leave out the shovel part. Still, the shovel part is a pretty important part, and seems to indicate that my Nevada storm is but a poor thing after all. As we proceeded, the altitude became less, and the heat proportionately greater until we reached Dubbo, which is only 600 feet above sea level. It is a pretty town, built on an extensive plain. After the effects of a shower of rain have passed away, the surface of the ground crumbles into a thick layer of dust, and occasionally, when the wind is in a particular quarter, it is lifted bodily from the ground in one long opaque cloud. In the midst of such a storm, nothing can be seen a few yards ahead, and the unlucky person who happens to be out at the time is compelled to seek the nearest retreat at hand. When the thrifty housewife sees in the distance the dark column advancing in a steady whirl towards her house, she closes the doors and windows with all expedition. A drawing room, the window of which has been carelessly left open during a dust storm, is indeed an extraordinary sight. A lady who has resided in Dubbo for some years says that the dust lies so thick on the carpet that it is necessary to use a shovel to remove it. And probably a wagon. I was mistaken. I have not seen a proper dust storm. To my mind, the exterior aspects and character of Australia are fascinating things to look at and think about. They are so strange, so weird, so new, so uncommonplace, such a startling and interesting contrast to the other sections of the planet, the sections that are known to us all, familiar to us all. In the matter of particulars, a detail here, a detail there, we have had the choice climate of New South Wales seacoast. We have had the Australian heat as furnished by Captain Sturt. We have had the wonderful dust storm, and we have considered the phenomenon of an almost empty hot wilderness half as big as the United States, with a narrow belt of civilization, population, and good climate around it. Chapter 10. Everything human is pathetic. The secret source of humor itself is not joy but sorrow. There is no humor in heaven. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. Captain Cook found Australia in 1770, and 18 years later the British government began to transport convicts to it. Altogether, New South Wales received 0 in 53 years. The convicts wore heavy chains, they were ill-fed and badly treated by the officers set over them, they were heavily punished for even slight infractions of the rules. The cruelest discipline ever known is one historian's description of their life. The Story of Australasia, J.S. Laurie. English law was hard-hearted in those days. For trifling offenses which in our day would be punished by a small fine or a few days, confinement, men, women, and boys were sent to this other end of the earth to serve terms of 7 and 14 years, and for serious crimes they were transported for life. Children were sent to the penal colonies for 7 years for stealing a rabbit. When I was in London 23 years ago, there was a new penalty in force for diminishing garroting and wife-beating. 25 lashes on the bare back with the cat o' nine tails. It was said that this terrible punishment was able to bring the stubbornest ruffians to terms, and that no man had been found with grit enough to keep his emotions to himself beyond the 9th blow. As a rule, the man shrieked earlier. That penalty had a great and wholesome effect upon the garroters and wife-beaters, but humane modern London could not endure it. it got its law rescinded. Many a bruised and battered English wife has since had occasion to deplore that cruel achievement of sentimental humanity. 25 lashes. In Australia and Tasmania, they gave a convict 50 for almost any little offense. And sometimes a brutal officer would add 50, and then another 50, and so on, as long as the sufferer could endure the torture and live. In Tasmania, I read the entry, in an old manuscript official record, of a case where a convict was given 300 lashes for stealing some silver spoons. And men got more than that sometimes. Who handled the cat? Often it was another convict. Sometimes it was the culprit's dearest comrade, and he had to lay on with all his might. Otherwise he would get a flogging himself for his mercy, for he was under watch, and yet not do his friend any good. The friend would be attended to by another hand and suffer no lack in the matter of full punishment. The convict life in Tasmania was so unendurable, and suicide so difficult to accomplish that once or twice despairing men got together and drew straws to determine which of them should kill another of the group. This murder to secure death to the perpetrator and to the witnesses of it by the hand of the hangman. The incidents quoted above are mere hints, mere suggestions of what convict life was like. They are but a couple of details tossed into view out of a shoreless sea of such. Or, to change the figure, they are but a pair of flaming steeples photographed from a point which hides from sight the burning city which stretches away from their bases on every hand. Some of the convicts, indeed, a good many of them, were very bad people, even for that day, but the most of them were probably not noticeably worse than the average of the people they left behind them at home. We must believe this, we cannot avoid it. We are obliged to believe that a nation that could look on, unmoved, and see starving or freezing women hanged for stealing 26 cents worth of bacon or rags, and boys snatched from their mothers, and men from their families, and sent to the other side of the world for long terms of years for similar, trifling offenses, was a nation to whom the term civilized could not in any large way be applied. And we must also believe that a nation that knew, during more than 40 years, what was happening to those exiles and was still content with it, was not advancing in any showy way toward a higher grade of civilization. If we look into the characters and conduct of the officers and gentlemen who had charge of the convicts and attended to their backs and stomachs, we must grant again that as between the convict and his masters, and between both and the nation at home, there was a quite noticeable monotony of sameness. 4 years had gone by, and many convicts had come. Respectable settlers were beginning to arrive. These two classes of colonists had to be protected, in case of trouble among themselves or with the natives. It is proper to mention the natives, though they could hardly count they were so scarce. At a time when they had not as yet begun to be much disturbed, not as yet being in the way, it was estimated that in New South Wales there was but one native to 45,000 acres of territory. People had to be protected. Officers of the regular army did not want this service, away off there where neither honor nor distinction was to be gained. So England recruited and officered a kind of militia force of 1,000 uniformed civilians called the New South Wales Corps and shipped it. This was the worst blow of all. The colony fairly staggered under it. The Corps was an object lesson of the moral condition of England outside of the jails. The colonists trembled. It was feared that next there would be an importation of the nobility. In those early days the colony was non-supporting. All the necessaries of life, food, clothing and all, were sent out from England and kept in great government storehouses and given to the convicts and sold to the settlers, sold at a trifling advance upon cost. The Corps saw its opportunity. Its officers went into commerce and in a most lawless way. They went to importing rum and also to manufacturing it in private stills, in defiance of the government's commands and protests. They leagued themselves together and ruled the market. They boycotted the government and the other dealers. They established a close monopoly and kept it strictly in their own hands. When a vessel arrived with spirits, they allowed nobody to buy but themselves, and they forced the owner to sell to them at a price named by themselves, and it was always low enough. They bought rum at an average of $2 a gallon and sold it at an average of 10. They made rum the currency of the country, for there was little or no money, and they maintained their devastating hold and kept the colony under their heel for 18 or 20 years before they were finally conquered and routed by the government. Meantime, they had spread intemperance everywhere, and they had squeezed farm after farm out of the settlers' hands for rum, and thus had bountifully enriched themselves. When a farmer was caught in the last agonies of thirst, They took advantage of him and sweated him for a drink. In one instance, they sold a man a gallon of rum worth $2 for a piece of property, which was sold some years later for $100,000. When the colony was about 18 or 20 years old, it was discovered that the land was specially fitted for the wool culture. Prosperity followed, commerce with the world began, by rich mines of the noble metals were opened, immigrants flowed in, capital likewise. The result is the great and wealthy and enlightened Commonwealth of New South Wales. It is a country that is rich in mines, wool ranches, trams, railways, steamship lines, schools, newspapers, botanical gardens, art galleries, libraries, museums, hospitals, learned societies. It is the hospitable home of every species of culture and of every species of material enterprise, and there is a church at every man's door and a racetrack over the way. Chapter 11. We should be careful to get out of an experience only the wisdom that is in it, and stop there, lest we be like the cat that sits down on a hot stove lid. She will never sit down on a hot stove lid again, and that is well, but also she will never sit down on a cold one anymore. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. All English-speaking colonies are made up of lavishly hospitable people, and New South Wales and its capital are like the rest in this. The English-speaking colony of the United States of America is always called lavishly hospitable by the English traveler. As to the other English-speaking colonies throughout the world from Canada all around, I know by experience that the description fits them. I will not go more particularly into this matter, for I find that when writers try to distribute their gratitude here and there, and yonder by detail they run across difficulties and do some ungraceful stumbling. Mr. Gape, New South Wales and Victoria in 1885, tried to distribute his gratitude and was not lucky. The inhabitants of Sydney are renowned for their hospitality. The treatment which we experienced at the hands of this generous-hearted people will help more than anything else to make us recollect with pleasure our stay amongst them. In the character of hosts and hostesses they excel. The new chum needs only the acquaintanceship of one of their number, and he becomes at once the happy recipient of numerous complimentary invitations and thoughtful kindnesses. Of the towns it has been our good fortune to visit, none have portrayed home so faithfully as Sydney. Nobody could say it finer than that, if he had put in his cork then and stayed away from Dubbo. But no, heedless man, he pulled it again. Pulled it when he was away along in his book, and his memory of what he had said about Sydney had grown dim. We cannot quit the promising town of Dubbo without testifying, in warm praise, to the kind-hearted and hospitable usages of its inhabitants. Sydney, though well deserving the character it bears of its kindly treatment of strangers, possesses a little formality and reserve. In Dubbo, on the contrary, though the same congenial manners prevail, there is a pleasing degree of respectful familiarity, which gives the town a homely comfort not often met with elsewhere. In laying on one side our pen, we feel contented in having been able, though so late in this work, to bestow a panegyric, however unpretentious, on a town which, though possessing no picturesque natural surroundings, nor interesting architectural productions, has yet a body of citizens whose hearts cannot but obtain for their town a reputation for benevolence and kind-heartedness. I wonder what soured him on Sydney. It seems strange that a pleasing degree of 3 or 4 fingers of respectful familiarity should fill a man up and give him the panegyrics so bad. For he has them, the worst way, anyone can see that. A man who is perfectly at himself does not throw cold detraction at people's architectural productions and picturesque surroundings, and let on that what he prefers is a Dubonese dust storm and a pleasing degree of respectful familiarity. No, these are old, old symptoms, and when they appear we know that the man has got the panegyrics. Sydney has a population of 400,000. When a stranger from America steps ashore there, the first thing that strikes him is that the place is 8 or 9 times as large as he was expecting it to be, and the next thing that strikes him is that it is an English city with American trimmings. Later on, in Melbourne, he will find the American trimmings still more in evidence. There, even the architecture will often suggest America. A photograph of its stateliest business street might be passed upon him for a picture of the finest street in a large American city. I was told that the most of the fine residences were the city residences of squatters. The name seemed out of focus somehow. When the explanation came, it offered a new instance of the curious changes which words, as well as animals, undergo through change of habitat and climate. With us, when you speak of a squatter, you're always supposed to be speaking of a poor man. But in Australia, when you speak of a squatter, you're supposed to be speaking of a millionaire. In America, the word indicates the possessor of a few acres and a doubtful title. In Australia, it indicates a man whose landfront is as long as a railroad, and whose title has been perfected in one way or another. In America, the word indicates a man who owns a dozen head of livestock. In Australia, a man who owns anywhere from 50,000 up to 500,000 head. In America, the word indicates a man who is obscure and not important. In Australia, a man who is prominent and of the first importance. In America, you take off your hat to no squatter. In Australia, you do. In America, if your uncle is a squatter, you keep it dark. In Australia, you advertise it. In America, if your friend is a squatter, nothing comes of it. But with a squatter for your friend in Australia, you may sup with kings if there are any around. In Australia, it takes about 2 acres and a half of pasture land, some people say twice as many, to support a sheep. And when the squatter has 500,000 sheep, his private domain is about as large as Rhode Island, to speak in general terms. His annual wool crop may be worth a quarter or $500,000. He will live in a palace in Melbourne or Sydney, or some other of the large cities, and make occasional trips to his sheep kingdom, several hundred miles away in the Great Plains, to look after his battalions of riders and shepherds and other hands. He has a commodious dwelling out there, and if he approve of you, he will invite you to spend a week in it, and will make you at home and comfortable, and let you see the great industry in all its details, and feed you and slake you and smoke you with the best that money can buy. On at least one of these vast estates, there is a considerable town, with all the various businesses and occupations that go to make an important town, and the town and the land it stands upon are the property of the squatters. I have seen that town, and it is not unlikely that there are other squatter-owned towns in Australia. Australia supplies the world not only with fine wool, but with mutton also. The modern invention of cold storage and its application in ships has created this great trade. In Sydney, I visited a huge establishment where they kill and clean and solidly freeze 1,000 sheep a day for shipment to England. The Australians did not seem to me to differ noticeably from Americans, either in dress, carriage, ways, pronunciation, inflections, or general appearance. There were fleeting and subtle suggestions of their English origin, but these were not pronounced enough, as a rule, to catch one's attention. The people have easy and cordial manners from the beginning, from the moment that the introduction is completed. This is American. To put it in another way, it is English friendliness with the English shyness and self-consciousness left out. Now and then, but this is rare, one hears such words as piper for paper, liddy for lady, and tibble for table fall from lips whence one would not expect such pronunciations to come. There is a superstition prevalent in Sydney that this pronunciation is an Australianism, but people who have been home, as the native reverently and lovingly calls England, know better. It is costermonger. All over Australasia, this pronunciation is nearly as common among servants as it is in London among the uneducated and the partially educated of all sorts and conditions of people. That mislaid y is rather striking when a person gets enough of it into a short sentence to enable it to show up. In the hotel in Sydney, the chambermaid said, one morning, "The tibble is set, and here is the piper, and if the liddy is ready, I'll tell the waiter to bring up the breakfast." I have made passing mention, a moment ago, of the native Australasians' custom of speaking of England as home. It was always pretty to hear it, and often it was said in an unconsciously caressing way that made it touching, in a way which transmuted a sentiment into an embodiment, and made one seem to see Australasia as a young girl stroking Mother England's old grey head. In the Australasian, home-the-table talk is vivacious and unembarrassed. It is without stiffness or restraint. This does not remind one of England so much as it does of America. But Australasia is strictly democratic, and reserves and restraints are things that are bred by differences of rank. English and colonial audiences are phenomenally alert and responsive. Where masses of people are gathered together in England, caste is submerged, and with it the English reserve. Equality exists for the moment, and every individual is free. So free from any consciousness of fetters, indeed, that the Englishman's habit of watching himself and guarding himself against any injudicious exposure of his feelings is forgotten, and falls into abeyance. And to such a degree, indeed, that he will bravely applaud all by himself if he wants to, an exhibition of daring which is unusual elsewhere in the world. But it is hard to move a new English acquaintance when he is by himself, or when the company present is small and new to him. He is on his guard then, and his natural reserve is to the fore. This has given him the false reputation of being without humor and without the appreciation of humor. Americans are not Englishmen, and American humor is not English humor. But both the American and his humor had their origin in England and have merely undergone changes brought about by changed conditions and a new environment. About the best humorous speeches I have yet heard were a couple that were made in Australia at club suppers, one of them by an Englishman, the other by an Australian. Chapter 12. There are those who scoff at the schoolboy, calling him frivolous and shallow. Yet it was the schoolboy who said, "Faith is believing what you know ain't so." Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. In Sydney, I had a large dream, and in the course of talk, I told it to a missionary from India who was on his way to visit some relatives in New Zealand. I dreamed that the visible universe is the physical person of God, that the vast worlds that we see twinkling millions of miles apart in the fields of space are the blood corpuscles in his veins, and that we and the other creatures are the microbes that charge with multitudinous life the corpuscles. Mr. X, the missionary, considered the dream a while, then said, "It is not surpassable for magnitude, since its metes and bounds are the metes and bounds of the universe itself. And it seems to me that it almost accounts for a thing which is otherwise nearly unaccountable, the origin of the sacred legends of the Hindus. Perhaps they dream them, and then honestly believe them to be divine revelations of fact. It looks like that, for the legends are built on so vast a scale that it does not seem reasonable that plotting priests would happen upon such colossal fancies when awake." He told some of the legends, and said that they were implicitly believed by all classes of Hindus, including those of high social position and intelligence. And he said that this universal credulity was a great hindrance to the missionary in his work. Then he said something like this: "At home, people wonder why Christianity does not make faster progress in India. They hear that the Indians believe easily, and that they have a natural trust in miracles, and give them a hospitable reception. Then they argue like this: since the Indian believes easily, place Christianity before them and they must believe, confirm its truths by the biblical miracles, and they will no longer doubt. The natural deduction is that as Christianity makes but indifferent progress in India, the fault is with us. We are not fortunate in presenting the doctrines and the miracles. But the truth is, we are not by any means so well equipped as they think. We have not the easy task that they imagine. To use a military figure, we are sent against the enemy with good powder in our guns, but only wads for bullets. That is to say, our miracles are not effective. The Hindus do not care for them. They have more extraordinary ones of their own. All the details of their own religion are proven and established by miracles. The details of ours must be proven in the same way. When I first began my work in India, I greatly underestimated the difficulties thus put upon my task. A correction was not long in coming. I thought, as our friends think at home, that to prepare my childlike wonder-lovers to listen with favor to my grave message, I only needed to charm the way to it with wonders, marvels, miracles. With full confidence, I told the wonders performed by Samson, the strongest man that had ever lived, for so I called him. At first I saw lively anticipation and strong interest in the faces of my people, but as I moved along from incident to incident of the great story, I was distressed to see that I was steadily losing the sympathy of my audience. I could not understand it. It was a surprise to me, and a disappointment. Before I was through, the fading sympathy had paled to indifference. Thence to the end the indifference remained. I was not able to make any impression upon it. A good old Hindu gentleman told me where my trouble lay. He said, "We Hindus recognize a God by the work of his hands. We accept no other testimony. Apparently, this is also the rule with you Christians. And we know when a man has his power from a God by the fact that he does things which he could not do, as a man, with the mere powers of a man. Plainly, this is the Christian's way also, of knowing when a man is working by a God's power and not by his own. You saw that there was a supernatural property in the hair of Samson, for you perceived that when his hair was gone, he was as other men. It is our way, as I have said. There are many nations in the world, and each group of nations has its own gods, and will pay no worship to the gods of the others. Each group believes its own gods to be strongest, and it will not exchange them except for gods that shall be proven to be their superiors in power. Man is but a weak creature, and needs the help of gods. He cannot do without it. Shall he place his fate in the hands of weak gods when there may be stronger ones to be found? That would be foolish. No, if he hear of gods that are stronger than his own, he should not turn a deaf ear, for it is not a light matter that is at stake. How then shall he determine which gods are the stronger, his own or those that preside over the concerns of other nations? by comparing the known works of his own gods with the works of those others. There is no other way. Now, when we make this comparison, we are not drawn towards the gods of any other nation. Our gods are shown by their works to be the strongest, the most powerful. The Christians have but few gods, and they are new, and not strong, as it seems to us. They will increase in number, it is true, for this has happened with all gods, but that time is far away, many ages and decades of ages away, for gods multiply slowly, as is meet for beings to whom 1,000 years is but a single moment. Our own gods have been born millions of years apart. The process is slow. The gathering of strength and power is similarly slow. In the slow lapse of the ages, the steadily accumulating power of our gods has at last become prodigious. We have 1,000 proofs of this in the colossal character of their personal acts and the acts of ordinary men to whom they have given supernatural qualities. To your Samson was given supernatural power, and when he broke the withs and slew the thousands with the jawbone of an ass, and carried away the gates of the city upon his shoulders, you were amazed and also awed, for you recognized the divine source of his strength. But it could not profit to place these things before your Hindu congregation and invite their wonder, for they would compare them with the deed done by Hanuman when our gods infused their divine strength into his muscles, and they would be indifferent to them, as you saw. In the old times, ages and ages gone by, when our god Rama was warring with the demon god of Ceylon, Rama bethought him to bridge the sea and connect Ceylon with India, so that his armies might pass easily over. And he sent his general, Hanuman, inspired like your own Samson with divine strength, to bring the materials for the bridge. In 2 days Hanuman strode 1,500 miles to the Himalayas, and took upon his shoulder a range of those lofty mountains 200 miles long, and started with it toward Ceylon. It was in the night, and as he passed along the plain, the people of Govardhan heard the thunder of his tread and felt the earth rocking under it, and they ran out, and there, with their snowy summits piled to heaven, they saw the Himalayas passing by. And as this huge continent swept along overshadowing the earth, upon its slopes they discerned the twinkling lights of 1,000 sleeping villages, and it was as if the constellations were filing in procession through the sky. While they were looking, Hanuman stumbled, and a small ridge of red sandstone 20 miles long was jolted loose and fell. Half of its length has wasted away in the course of the ages, but the other 10 miles of it remain in the plain by Govardhan to this day, as proof of the might of the inspiration of our gods. You must know yourself that Hanuman could not have carried those mountains to Ceylon except by the strength of the gods. You know that it was not done by his own strength. Therefore, you know that it was done by the strength of the gods, just as you know that Samson carried the gates by the divine strength and not by his own. I think you must concede two things. First, that in carrying the gates of the city upon his shoulders, Samson did not establish the superiority of his gods over ours. Secondly, that his feat is not supported by any but verbal evidence, while Hanuman's is not only supported by verbal evidence, but this evidence is confirmed, established, proven by visible, tangible evidence, which is the strongest of all testimony. We have the sandstone ridge, and while it remains, we cannot doubt and shall not. Have you the gates? Chapter 13. The timid man yearns for full value and asks a tenth. The bold man strikes for double value and compromises on par. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. One is sure to be struck by the liberal way in which Australasia spends money upon public works, such as legislative buildings, town halls, hospitals, asylums, parks, and botanical gardens. I should say that where minor towns in America spend $100 on the town hall and on public parks and gardens, the like towns in Australasia spend 1,000. And I think that this ratio will hold good in the matter of hospitals also. I have seen a costly and well-equipped and architecturally handsome hospital in an Australian village of 1,500 inhabitants. It was built by private funds furnished by the villagers and the neighboring planters, and its running expenses were drawn from the same sources. I suppose it would be hard to match this in any country. This village was about to close a contract for lighting its streets with the electric light when I was there. That is ahead of London. London is still obscured by gas pretty widely scattered, too, in some of the districts. So widely indeed that except on moonlight nights it is difficult to find the gas lamps. The Botanical Garden of Sydney covers 38 acres, beautifully laid out and rich with the spoil of all the lands and all the climes of the world. The garden is on high ground in the middle of the town, overlooking the great harbour, and it adjoins the spacious grounds of Government House, 56 acres, and at hand also is a recreation ground containing 82 acres. In addition, there are the zoological gardens, the race course, and the great cricket grounds where the international matches are played. Therefore, there is plenty of room for reposeful lazying and lounging, and for exercise too, for such as like that kind of work. There are four specialties attainable in the way of social pleasure. If you enter your name on the visitor's book at Government House, you will receive an invitation to the next ball that takes place there, if nothing can be proven against you. And it will be very pleasant, for you will see everybody except the governor, and add a number of acquaintances and several friends to your list. The governor will be in England. He always is. The continent has 4 or 5 governors, and I do not know how many it takes to govern the outlying archipelago, but anyway you will not see them. When they are appointed, they come out from England and get inaugurated, and give a ball, and help pray for rain, and get aboard ship and go back home. And so the lieutenant governor has to do all the work. I was in Australasia 3 months and a half and saw only one governor. The others were at home. The Australasian governor would not be so restless, perhaps, if he had a war, or a veto, or something like that to call for his reserve energies, but he hasn't. There isn't any war and there isn't any veto in his hands, and so there is really little or nothing doing in his line. The country governs itself and prefers to do it, and is so strenuous about it and so jealous of its independence that it grows restive if even the imperial government at home proposes to help. And so the imperial veto, while a fact, is yet mainly a name. Thus the governor's functions are much more limited than are a governor's functions with us, and therefore more fatiguing. He is the apparent head of the state, he is the real head of society. He represents culture, refinement, elevated sentiment, polite life, religion, and by his example he propagates these, and they spread and flourish and bear good fruit. He creates the fashion and leads it. His ball is the ball of balls, and his countenance makes the horse race thrive. He is usually a lord, and this is well, for his position compels him to lead an expensive life, and an English lord is generally well equipped for that. Another of Sydney's social pleasures is the visit to the Admiralty House, which is nobly situated on high ground overlooking the water. The trim boats of the service convey the guests thither, and there, or on board the flagship, they have the duplicate of the hospitalities of Government House. The admiral commanding a station in British waters is a magnate of the first degree, and he is sumptuously housed, as becomes the dignity of his office. Third in the list of special pleasures is the tour of the harbor in a fine steam pleasure launch. Your richer friends own boats of this kind, and they will invite you, and the joys of the trip will make a long day seem short. And finally comes the shark fishing. Sydney Harbor is populous with the finest breeds of man-eating sharks in the world. Some people make their living catching them, for the government pays a cash bounty on them. The larger the shark, the larger the bounty, and some of the sharks are 20 feet long. You not only get the bounty, but everything that is in the shark belongs to you. Sometimes the contents are quite valuable. The shark is the swiftest fish that swims. The speed of the fastest steamer afloat is poor compared to his, and he is a great gadabout and roams far and wide in the oceans, and visits the shores of all of them, ultimately, in the course of his restless excursions. I have a tale to tell now, which has not as yet been in print. In 1870, a young stranger arrived in Sydney and set about finding something to do, but he knew no one and brought no recommendations, and the result was that he got no employment. He had aimed high at first, but as time and his money wasted away, he grew less and less exacting, until at last he was willing to serve in the humblest capacities, if so he might get bread and shelter. But luck was still against him. He could find no opening of any sort. Finally, his money was all gone. He walked the streets all day, thinking. He walked them all night, thinking, and growing hungrier and hungrier. At dawn, he found himself well away from the town and drifting aimlessly along the harbor shore. As he was passing by a nodding shark fisher, the man looked up and said, "Say, young fellow, take my line a spell and change my luck for me." "How do you know I won't make it worse?" "Because you can't. It has been at its worst all night. If you can't change it, no harm's done. If you do change it, it's for the better, of course. Come." "All right, what will you give?" "I'll give you the shark if you catch one. And I will eat it, bones and all. Give me the line." "Here you are. I will get away now for a while so that my luck won't spoil yours. For many and many a time I've noticed that if— There, pull in, man, you've got a bite. I knew how it would be. Why, I knew you for a born son of luck the minute I saw you. All right, he's landed." It was an unusually large shark, a full 19-footer, the fisherman said, as he laid the creature open with his knife. "Now you rob him, young man, while I step to my hamper for a fresh bait. There's generally something in them worth going for. You've changed my luck, you see, but my goodness, I hope you haven't changed your own." Oh, it wouldn't matter. Don't worry about that. Get your bait, I'll rob him. When the fisherman got back, the young man had just finished washing his hands in the bay and was starting away. What? You are not going? Yes, goodbye. But what about your shark? The shark, why, what use is he to me? What use is he? I like that. Don't you know that we can go and report him to government and you'll get a clean solid 80 shillings bounty? Hard cash, you know. What do you think about it now? Oh, well, you can collect it. And keep it, is that what you mean? Yes.